following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when Jints and bums walked the streets of New York. They played in New York back in the day. I'm Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zoned Network. The man is here. He wrote 2 books that are basically about that, a Giant book and a Dodger book. Noel Hind, how are you, sir?
I'm okay. How are you, Ralph?
Good. Excuse the elongated introduction, but that's the way it is on Tuesday morning in California, and you're back east. Am I correct?
Me? No.
Yeah.
I'm in the Los Angeles area.
Oh, okay. I blank sometimes.
I do too. I had to stop and think where I was.
Okay, we got it straight. We're going to talk some Major League shortstops in New York back in the day. It was pretty clear. The 3 shortstops I have in mind to talk about, the Giants' Al Dark, the Dodgers' PeeWee Reese, and the Yankees' Phil Rizzuto, the Scooter. What an age to grow up in when 2 Hall of Famers future Hall of Famers playing shortstop in New York, and one that you could make a case that if the other 2 are in the Hall of Fame, Al Dark should be as well. I'd like your opinion on that.
Yes, I would kind of agree on that. I did a little bit of prep, if you can imagine that, for this show, and was taking a look through Alvin Dark's career, and it really is parallel to some of the other people who are in the Hall of Fame, particularly as infielders. For example, Travis Jackson, who was the great shortstop on John McGraw's team in teams in the 20s and 30s. You might remember him personally, Ralph, but I don't.
I do. I went to school with his dad, as a matter of fact.
Is that right? Really?
Yeah. He was a good guy. I watched this kid grow up.
Okay.
Not quite, but could have been.
Not quite as kid, or not quite grow up, or should I just leave that alone?
Well, I don't know from growing up. I'm the last person who has a word on that, being the eternal Peter Pan of life.
In any case,
he was a Hall of Famer.
Yes, he was. He was put in by the Veterans Committee in the early 80s, I believe, or maybe the late 70s. And a lot of people make the case that the Veterans Committee in that era was overloaded with people who were friendly with some of the old Giants, or it was top-heavy with people from the Giants organization. So a few people got in, such as Jackson, such as Rube Marquardt, who in later years, the people who like to snipe at who should not be on the Hall of Fame often draw a target on those people. I think Jackson should be in. He is in, and that's not going to change. I think you could make a strong case for Alvin Dark, but there are a lot of people right on that cusp, if you want to call it that, like Gil Hodges, who should be in, and so there's certainly room for discussion. Dark was a great shortstop, overshadowed by Reese and Rizzuto, but if the Giants had won all of those championships in that era, Dark probably would have been in.
Good, very good point. He was on 2 championship teams, the National League champs in '51, and he did indeed, with the '54 Giants, become a world champion. No slouch. Go ahead.
That is correct. So he had the same number of championships as PeeWee Reese, for example, in New York at least. So the more I think about it, the more I wonder how he got overlooked. You could also go back to the late 1940s. Dark was the Rookie of the Year, I believe, in 1940, might have been 46, 48, but he also played on the Boston Braves team in 1948, which was in the World Series. So Dark was in the World Series, more than a couple of times. Didn't perform that well in the World Series, but he was certainly a team leader. For example, when he came to the Giants, Leo DeRocher appointed him captain of the team right away, the day he arrived. Now, DeRocher usually knew what he was doing. He had his agendas. He got himself in trouble. He had a interesting life outside the baseball diamond, but when he made a baseball decision, usually it was a pretty solid one.
And he was the one that convinced Horace Stoneham to trade some of their older players, big strapping guys, hit for power, but they weren't winning. And he convinced Stoneham to trade for Dark and Stanky. And
yes,
that made all of the difference in terms of building that early 50s Giant team, which, as you say, didn't win as much as the Dodgers, but they were competitive, and any team with Willie has got to make a dent somewhere along the line, and they did. And I wonder how many more they would have won had Willie not gone into the service. And 52 and 53. So we will never know on that basis. But of the three, Dark was the best all-around athlete. He was running back at LSU, and I can't think of who he beat out. He beat out at one time an All-American runner at running back at LSU. He was a great athlete, and
in fact, he was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, and then he went off. Yeah, and then he went off to. He had a strong game in one of those late season bowl games. I guess it was around 1945 or so. I'm working without notes. It's just my marvelous memory.
Well, this is
sometimes gets me in trouble. But Dark had a I think it was called the Oil Bowl or something, which sounds like something you'd put under your car when it's in at Pep Boys or something. But he played he had a great game at quarterback, and the Eagles drafted him. And I believe he then went into the U.S. Army after the war. Might have been during the war. And in fact, I think he was stationed in Asia. When he came back, he had to make a decision as to whether to play baseball or whether to play football, and he decided to play baseball, which I guess you could say was a good decision because he really had a great career.
Oh, not only did he have a great career, he had a very, very controversial career as a manager.
Yes.
He had some success. He had some personal demons in terms of what was programmed into his head being a Southern boy.
I remember that actually when it happened, and it was kind of unfortunate. He made a statement somewhere where he thought he was talking off the record, and I believe the gist of what he said was that the white players that he had were just plain smarter than the black players, with the exception of Willie Mays. Needless to say, it was a stupid thing to say. It was an even stupider thing to say with reporters present. And I believe there was a reporter from, might have been Newsday, who picked up on it. This is, by the way, when Dark was managing the San Francisco Giants. So,
right, and I think it was in reference to Orlando Cepeda. It wasn't black, but he was Latin, and
In fact, I think the statement, now that you remind me, may have encompassed Latino players also. So I believe didn't he deny that he said it or something like that, and the reporters stood by it? You would never get away with it.
I think he
said it was
like
today.
They were taking it out of context. But, if the context is there, it's pretty hard to deny the statement.
That's very true. I mean, what context makes it sound better? I can't think of one.
Exactly. Oh, I didn't mean the Latins were not as smart. I just meant the blacks weren't as smart. The Latins were just as smart, but they weren't as smart as the blacks. Craziness. Yeah. And it's
the more you twist and turn with it, the worse it gets.
Exactly. He did have a redemption later in life. I think he came to terms with Orlando, and I think they made peace. But he again, it's how you're raised, and there are certain damages, certain cultural damages that you can hide a little bit, you can cover up, but they never really truthfully go away. And the one exception to that rule was another shortstop that was raised in the South, in context with what we're talking about now, and that's PeeWee Reese, and how he reacted to Jackie coming up, and the prospect of Jackie coming up was totally different. Again, raised in a region where the kind of open thinking that he had was not very well accepted, and he for that reason alone, he was a great man. Talk about Pee-wee. Talk about what happened when Jackie was called up.
Well, I know, again, this is an area that, perhaps Alan would be better on, but of course he's not here, so that means it's my question. Reese, of course, was from a border state, Kentucky, and was one of the guys in the clubhouse who was more, in the Dodger clubhouse when Jackie Robinson came up, who was, shall we say, had enough of a vision and perhaps enough of a social conscience to say, this guy's a Dodger, he's here, he's going to play. And he did as much as he could from what I've learned to defuse the situation and make sure that the clique of Southern players in the Dodger locker room were not going to sabotage Jackie and undercut the integration of both the Dodgers and baseball. You could say that Reese, if you really think it through, did a tremendous favor for the Dodger organization by allowing them to be the team that were integrating more aggressively than a lot of other teams, and it helped build not just the great teams in Brooklyn with Newcomb and Joe Black and Campanella, but also when it morphed into the Los Angeles Dodgers, they had guys like Maury Wills, Tommy Davis, Willie Davis coming up in the farm system. Gilliam, obviously, who was the transitional guy between Brooklyn and New York. Charlie Neal was a useful player as a utility infielder. So much can be said. I mean, it wasn't what Reese did to help the organization and to help baseball and to, by extension, helping social justice was huge. It really was monumental and carried on for decades.
I just wanted to note that when Reese found out about the Jackie signing, he was on a boat coming back from fighting the war. And there were two things. It was not just that the Dodgers were signing a black, and that his brethren in Kentucky would not be able to understand how a white player could get on a field with a black. But that notwithstanding, Jackie was signed originally as a shortstop, which threatened Reese's job. It didn't end up threatening him because Jackie ended up playing first and then second. But initially, he was signed as a shortstop, and it made Reese's actions even more creditable as far as I'm concerned, because Jackie threatened his personal livelihood, and Reese said, "Bring it on. If that's the way it is, if he's a better player, the color of his skin shouldn't matter." And as you mentioned, there were a number of Southern crackers, if you will, on that early Dodger team that were even signed a petition or threatened to sign a petition to keep Jackie off. And that's where Leo DeRocher really made his bones in terms of he wasn't a particularly good guy. Let's put it that way. He was kind of an eclectic personality, but he stood up to those Dodgers who said, this guy's going to help us win, and anybody that doesn't like it can be playing somewhere else. And he was backed up by Mr. Rickey, and so the transition went. But it could not have gone as smoothly as it did without Reese.
Yeah, Reese refused to sign the petition that was going around, and basically put the racist white players on the defensive. And DeRocher, of course, backed him up and came out with that famous statement of, I don't care if he's pink or green, or if the best part of the quote was, or has stripes like a fucking zebra, he's going to play. Often it's just in the press as striped like a zebra. What I loved about that quote was every kid in Brooklyn knew the quote, and it hadn't been on the radio, it hadn't been in any newspapers. It just traveled. It just traveled from schoolyard to schoolyard, and probably people overheard their parents talking about it in their home. And it was not universally popular at the time, but it worked, and it was on the right side of history, obviously.
No, I'm going to ask you this. I've long had the idea in my head that there is no other city but Brooklyn who could have paved the way for Jackie in the way that Brooklyn did. It was the perfect fit.
It's an interesting point. If your question is what other team could he have come up with, certainly not St. Louis. Well, certainly eliminate everything in the American League for starters.
Right. Certainly not Philadelphia.
Certainly not Philadelphia. Certainly not Boston. Cincinnati basically had a southern fan base because they're right across from Kentucky. Right. Not St. Louis. I guess. Well, of course, the Braves are still in Boston, so eliminate the Boston Braves. Pittsburgh. Very interesting point. It really, I guess, kind of came down to whether it was going to happen in Brooklyn or whether it was going to happen at the Polo Grounds. And, it happened at Brooklyn, and I don't think the Giants were quite in the ball game for shaking the foundations of baseball. So you're basically right. It happened at least in 1947, where it was going to happen in 1947. If the Robinson experiment had failed in 1947 in Brooklyn, one wonders who might have tried it next. I guess Bill Veeck was anxious to do it. But
he did with Larry Doby soon after Jackie was called up.
It was almost as if Veeck wished he had been the guy, and then was very quick to try to follow it up.
Right. And to show you how New York was, the Yankees didn't integrate until 1956, 9 years after Jackie, and they held back Vic Power in the minors. Elston Howard was the first to come up, but much too late. Just the craziness of it all when you look back, that for the color of someone's skin to be not denied anything is a pox on America. It's just what we Jews call a shanda, a disgrace.
Yeah. And, I'm one of the few Goy you can run words like that fast, and I know what you're talking about.
Well, it's amazing how Yiddish is. It's a conglomerate of English, of German, of Russian, but it's a language that gets the job done. So thank you, Leo Roston, for that fine book, The Joys of Yiddish, and thank you for your fine books. Let's talk about the scooter, Phil Rizzuto, a little bit. What comes to mind when I mention him?
Well, strangely enough, the first thing that comes to mind segs actually right into what we were just talking about. When Elston Howard came up to the Yankees, and I think it might have been 1955 actually. He was with the Yankees, trained in St. Petersburg, and the Cardinals split Al Lang Stadium with the Yankees. And Bill White, who had been later to be the president of the National League and later a star with the Cardinals, had come up with the New York Giants, played with the Giants in 1956, and then went into the Army when the team moved, called the team when he got out of the Army, and they had Cepeda at first base, and I don't think White ever played for the Giants again. They shipped him to the Cardinals, which actually was a great break. In any case, Elston Howard...
For sad Sam Jones.
Yeah. A kind of a tragic guy, Jones. But let me stick with Elston Howard, and we were trying to talk about Rizzuto. Anyway, to make a long story short, Bill White and Elston Howard used to go to spring training in Florida. Some of the facilities remained segregated, and Cora Rizzuto would cook meatballs and spaghetti for Ellie Howard and Bill White at their wherever they were staying, and that's how these guys got through spring training. I'm sure that I wish I could have gotten meatballs and spaghetti from Cora Rizzuto. It was probably really great.
You could imagine how good that was. Huh?
Oh yeah, real New York, New Jersey Italian stuff. God, I miss it. In any case, that's one of the first things that comes up with to me is that because it was part of baseball, and yet it wasn't part of the game on the field, but once again it was revelatory of character and kindness and sort of the better aspect of what we expect from our country. In terms of on the field, Rizzuto was just an outstanding shortstop. He used to tell stories about how, I believe Rizzuto had something like 60 career home runs over the course of maybe 15 years or something, and he said half of them were in Fenway Park. So, and the Red Sox pitchers used to knock him down at Fenway Park, and they would then have to pitch to Mantle and Berra and Howard and guys who would really knock the ball out, and then Rizzuto would come up and he'd get hit, he'd get knocked down.
Right.
I don't know how tall he really was. I never saw him close up in person. I know when Eddie Goodell was sent up to bat by Bill Veeck, and the commissioner said you can't do that. Veeck wanted a clarification from the commissioner as to whether Phil Rizzuto was actually a tall dwarf. And of course, Ford Frick did not appreciate the correspondence. And then as an announcer for years and years and years, he was just the voice of the Yankees and an integral part of the whole sort of feel of Yankee Stadium. Rizzuto's defensive ability was extraordinary. I forget what Yankee pitchers once was asked, "What's your best pitch?" And the answer was, anything I can hit, anything that I can get the batter to hit it to Phil Rizzuto. So there you go.
Speaking of your favorite word, it was Casey Stengel who called him a fucking acrobat.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, before Rizzuto, when he was a kid and he was coming up, before he signed the professional contract, he tried out with the Dodgers, and Casey Stengel was the manager at that time. And Casey Stengel said, "Kid, go get a shoe shine box." And that's what inspired Rizzuto to A, hate Stengel for the rest of his life, and B, overachieve to make it to the majors.
My father, you used to tell me a story. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I don't know whether this was ever printed. My father, just to backtrack, as you know, was a newspaper man in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, and knew a lot of the sports writers. And apparently Rizzuto, when he was first called up, which I think was in 1939, showed up at Yankee Stadium with some sort of ridiculous country bumpkin hat and a straw suitcase, and reported to the players' entrance, and they wouldn't let him in. They looked at him and said, "Come on." He thought it was just a kid trying to get into the ballpark.
Right.
And I think somebody had to come out and rescue him.
Two things come to mind with Rizzuto. One was when a player would come up in those days, they were looking for somebody's job, a teammate's job. And the Yankees, he was a rookie, and they didn't take to him easily, and they wouldn't give him a shot in batting practice, in the rotation. And DiMaggio was the guy who said, "Wait a minute, it's his turn to hit. He's going to get into the batter's box." So DiMaggio helped him immensely. And the other thing that comes to mind is the New York Yankees organization, towards the end of his career, they called him up into the front office and said, "We're looking to make a deal. Who do you think we should trade, or who do you think we should get rid of?" And all they were doing was messing with his head, because they wanted to get rid of Phil Rizzuto. And they did. They cut him on Old Timers Day. I think it was 1956.
Yep, that's what I remember. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All the old timers in New York, it's traditional. They're the ones that started Old Timers. They brought back and still do the greats of their past. And they're all sitting around, and Phil Rizzuto is cut on that day. He had to go into the locker room, clear out his stuff on Old Timers Day, after leading them basically to 5 championships in a row.
Mm-hmm.
It was disgraceful.
This is how the Yankees developed that reputation of being absolutely heartless in their management, and it's why a number of people who grew up in New York through that era. Not only were they not Yankee fans, but they really hated the Yankees because it was just it was just corporate before baseball was corporate. And the image was that here are these guys, Topping and Webb, who were in real estate and casinos. They're making money down on Wall Street, and basically they don't give a damn about anybody except themselves, and they could be heartless even to their own players.
Well, to cut the guy on Old Timers Day was horrible, but my point was how he responded to it. He didn't go to the papers. He didn't complain. And sure enough, a year later, the Yankees hired him as a broadcaster. And he worked with Red Barber and Jerry Coleman, another former Yankee infielder, and was in his day, before he became what I call a caricature of himself. Later, when he would announce, I wasn't watching what was in the scorecard, who was up, it's starting to rain, I'm going to go back to New Jersey, leave the game early. That was after he became, like I say, a caricature. When he first came up as an announcer, when he first started, he was really good, very insightful. He paved the way for guys like Kubek and Richardson to get a little between doubleheader gigs and this, that, and the other thing. He was a terrific man as a human. And when you can combine that with being a terrific ball player and announcer, that's really nice. He's an icon in New York.
Absolutely. He how long did he do the Yankees? I know he started in 1956, as you just said, and I think he was there for would it have been 40 years? I mean, up until maybe the 90s, 96
right.
or so?
Right. And you mentioned Bill White before that. Isn't it interesting that his wife, Rizzuto's wife, served him meatballs when he was a kid, and Bill White becomes a Yankee announcer and his partner in the booth years later.
Yeah. Who he would always refer to as White.
Right.
He'd say,
exactly.
White. You ever hear some of the Billy Crystal imitations of Phil Rizzuto? They're wonderful.
I can't say as I remember any of them off my hand, but I'm going to look on YouTube for that because everything. I was just going to say everything is on YouTube nowadays.
Yes, whether you want it or not.
Right. Speaking of that, even comfortably zoned radio network programs are archived on YouTube, whether you want them or not. They're there, and they will continue to be there for eternity, hopefully. I hope YouTube outlives, is there, so a record of our era goes down. I just hope they don't blow it all up. Let's put it that way.
I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
These are tenuous times, but like, what did Billy Joel say? These are not the best of times, but they're the only times I've ever known.
Is it very true? I remember James Baldwin, the author, was once commiserating about the way he was treated racially in the United States, and somebody said to him, "Jimmy, don't worry. Long term, all of this is going to change." And Baldwin, without missing a beat, said, "Yes, but the problem is I'm alive right now."
Right. Right. Don't tell me about 30 years from now. I want it now.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted it yesterday, if the truth be known. So, hey, this has been another great one, Noel Hyde. We missed Alan this morning, But we'll be back at you next week, same time, same bat station, as he likes to say. And I'm appreciative of your company. It brings me back to the old days, and nobody does it better than you. Plug your book.
I will plug both of them. The Giants of the Polo Grounds, which is a long anecdotal history of the New York Giants when they played in New York, and also a second book, which I am happy to say was #1 on Amazon Kindle in baseball history over the Labor Day weekend. It's called The Final Game at Ebbets Field. It's a collection of true vintage baseball stories, and the main one in there is a comprehensive coverage of the final game at Ebbets Field. What a coincidence that it should land in a book by the same title. There you go. Thank you.
Hey, one other thing. You mentioned your dad. Please pay homage to him a little bit. For those of you out in the audience who maybe hearing Noel for the first time, tell us a little bit about your dad.
Well, my father was a true crime writer. He started at age 17 on the Boston Post in 1920, and through a quirk of event and happenstance covered the Ponzi case, the original Charlie Ponzi, who was originating the so-called Ponzi scheme in Boston. My father then became covered most of the big crimes of the mid part of the 20th century. The Lindbergh kidnapping, Dillinger, the Midwestern gangsters like Bonnie and Clyde, and the mobsters in Chicago. Some of his stories are still around. You can find them on Amazon if you look under the name of Alan, A-L-A-N, Hind, H-Y-N-D. And I'm also writing a trilogy of books on 3 of his most perplexing cases. One of them is called Ashes from a Burning Corpse. It's about the 1943 murder of Sir Harry Oakes in the Bahamas. Down the road, I'm going to write about my father covering the original Charles Ponzi in Boston in 1920 at the age of 17. And then the most sinister case of all, the Lindbergh kidnapping, which my father was an expert on, was actually fired from his paper in New Jersey for printing what was really going on at that trial, at the Hauptmann trial in the 1930s. So that's just a little taste. If you Google his name, A-L-A-N, last name H-Y-N-D, you'll come up with a couple of bios on Amazon.
Well, I could just imagine what your dinner conversations were about. What you do at school today? Well, let me tell you what I did at work today.
Well, they were sometimes even more colorful because a couple of times he invited to the house people who he was writing stories about. I can remember around 1960, this Lebanese guy who was a mafia guy in Bridgeport, Connecticut, came over and was discussing cases, and my mother had to leave the room. She just couldn't tolerate this. My mother was a very proper lady from a very conservative background of of white Anglo-Saxon people in suburban New Jersey, and my father was a working class guy from Trenton. Anyway, this guy was teaching me how to deal cards from off the bottom of the deck, and also not just how to do it successfully, but also how to tell how somebody else was doing it. You'd have to listen for a different type of click, and apparently when you're dealing off the bottom of the deck, you want to have the card hit the table that you're playing with, as opposed to come off without hitting the table, because it hides the second click of another card coming off the bottom. I'll teach you sometime, Ralph, when we meet in person, and then we'll go over to a bar and see if we can make some money.
That's incredible. We'll have to have we'll have to have a show on the network about the Lindbergh kidnapping.
Yeah, well, I will put that off into next year when hopefully the book will be out. But if you want some time, we'll talk about the Sir Harry Oakes case, which was a case that took place in 1943 in the Bahamas. It involved the British royal family. It involved the wealthiest man in the world being murdered. It's pretty much been forgotten. And there were threats on my father's life, which I will go into at greater detail. I should say not just threats, but attempts because of what he printed. But, as I say, a story for another day.
That's known as a teaser.
Yes.
All right. I'm learning the lingo just to keep up with you, my friend.
Knowing me is better than going to college, Ralph. I keep telling you that.
You're a pleasure. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for being here, Noel Hyde. We'll pick up on you next week. Al Blumpkin, you were missed. And we covered Shortstops from the old days when Bums and Jints played in New York. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Thanks for listening, everybody. Catch you next week, Noel.
Thank you. Take care. See you soon. Bye.
Be healthy. Bye. The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.